Hi, people are starting to join. Isn't automatically muted on the people who join? That makes sense, right?
Yes, but they have the options to unmute once they come in muted.
Cool.
I'm also waiting on the ASL interpreter to come in, but I don't see them.
We start at 2:45, right? 3:45.
3:45.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh yeah, 2:45 for you. Yeah. I guess we can just give it as many minutes as it takes for people to hop on.
Right. Sounds good to me.
So I just found out that there won't be an interpreter in the room, in this session. I don't know. Did y'all already know that?
I didn't know that, but I think that's okay.
Okay, cool.
Hey everyone, we're gonna give it a couple more minutes before we begin.
Kia, where are you?
I'm right here.
No. Where are you, like, physically? Are you in your apartment in New Orleans?
Yeah, I'm in New Orleans. Yeah.
Your apartment looks so nice. Look at that bookshelf.
Thank you. I quit my RA job.
Yeah, I thought
October
you were
8th.
alright.
Yeah, I quit. Yeah.
Worth it.
Oh, definitely. I thought something happened with Zoom and like you couldn't see me anymore. I was like, I'm right here. Mhm.
Kay, are we good to get started or should we wait a little bit longer?
We're good to get started. Everything's open. It's recording. Just waiting on you all to start.
Oh, great. Cool. Okay, Kia, do you want us? Are we good? Cool. Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. We're really excited to be presenting today. Our session is called Students of Color Organizing for Reproductive Justice at Primarily White Institutions. And Kia and I kind of came up with this idea about a year ago. We both went to Tulane University, a primarily white institution in New Orleans. Kia's still there, I'm not. And so through organizing there and through organizing specifically for reproductive justice and being involved in an organization called Students United for Reproductive Justice, we were able to like sit down and have a conversation and realize that a lot of the concerns and the problems that we were having were not unique to just one of us, but were things that were happening to a lot of students of color who are attempting to do this work on college campuses. And so we wanted to create a space where we can talk about this and have conversation about what the challenges are, what this looks like, and also what are some potential solutions to this problem. This is a really conversational workshop that we're doing. So there's going to be an education component at the beginning, but then a lot of it, we want to hear from you. We want to hear about your experiences. We are going to be personally sharing a lot from our own experiences. So we want it to be a safe space for us to talk about what this looks like, because a lot of these things don't have cut and dry solutions. So we want to hear from all of you guys too. I guess I am the one who controls the slideshow. Yeah. Okay, so a little bit about us. My name is Simran Singh Jan. Like I said, I went to Tulane University. I graduated in December, and now I currently live in Syracuse, New York. I am moving tomorrow, so that bio will have to be updated very soon. But I work at an anti-incarceration nonprofit. I'm a youth justice specialist, so I work with young people who have been impacted by or touched by the criminal justice system. We do reintegration processes. We work within the school system. And I also interned at Sister Song last year through the CLIP program, and I am a poet and a writer, so I like to incorporate art into my activism.
Hey everyone, my name is Lakia Williams. I use she, her pronouns, and I am a current senior at Tulane University. I'm about to start my last semester, so I'm really excited for that. I currently work with Sister Song as their digital organizer. I was also an intern in the same program as Simran, and she actually helped me a lot, like with the application stuff and like helping me like become like a standout applicant. So appreciate it for her. I also work part-time at the Reproductive Justice Action Collective in New Orleans, and I host a podcast called Black Feminist Rants, and that's basically it.
So now we want to hear a little bit about who are you, and if you guys, let me see how many people are in here. I think there aren't too many. It'll be pretty easy for us to have everybody turn on their mics real quick and just tell us who you are. We want to hear your name, your pronouns, and what your affiliation to a university is. Like, why are you in this session in particular? Are you a student? Are you administrator? Or are you just a community member who is interested in this topic? So if you guys want to unmute yourselves, everyone's welcome to talk now. Do I have to allow people to talk? Because I definitely have a button that says allow to talk. Oh, I have to allow it. Okay, cool. I'm going to start just randomly allowing people. Is that okay with everybody? Well, you can't answer me, so. Andy, I just allowed you to unmute if you want to share.
Yeah, for sure. Hey, y'all. My name's Andy. My pronouns are they, them, or he, him. I'm actually an organizer in Alabama with URGE, Unite for Reproductive and Gender Equity. So we're a youth-focused reproductive justice organization, and I work on the college campuses here in Alabama, most of which are PWIs that I'm currently working at. So I just wanted to attend this session and learn more ways that I can best support my students in that environment.
Thank you. Okay, Emily. I guess I could just unmute. I could allow everybody to talk at once, and then you guys can choose if you want to share. Versus me calling on people, that feels weird. All right, I think that everyone's allowed to talk now, so go ahead.
I can go. Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, my name is Kelsey Jackson. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm a senior at Miami University in Ohio, which is very predominantly white, as well as I'm also the president of the URGE chapter there. So my interest in this is just kind of learning how to better advocate for my friends and other students of color at my university.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kenjo Kiama. I use she and her pronouns. I work on the organizing team at Advocates for Youth, which is an organization that supports grassroots young activists all across the country. And so I currently work with student activists and young activists generally. And then, I also started, being an activist as a college student on a predominantly white campus a couple years back. So I also have some experience and interest in the topic for that reason. Thank you all for presenting.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
I can go. My name is Gabby, and my pronouns are she, her, and currently I am working with alumni from a predominantly white private school that we all attended because of just like efforts that are being made there by current students that we want to support and like holding this school accountable to its racism and kind of all of the ways that that has impacted student experiences there. So I'm definitely interested in this topic. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you, Gabby.
Also, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat if you'd prefer not to speak out loud.
Hi, I can go next. My name is Emily. My pronouns are she, her, Aya, and I am the Georgia State organizer for URGE. And so I work with a lot of college students, also people who live in cities as well. So it's not just strictly to college campuses, but I do find some challenges in working on predominantly white institutions. And also as a former chapter leader, that was what I was mainly seeing was obstacles on campuses on how to be able to organize students and, having to fall within that line of like, what is acceptable, like what is going to be productive. And so I'm interested to hear what folks have to say about, like what it's like to, overcome those obstacles and have some type of change actually come out of working either with or against university administration.
Great.
I can go next. My name is Nigel. My pronouns are he, him. Similar to Andy and Emily, I am the Kansas organizer with URGE, doing a lot of the same work on mostly predominantly white institutions. So I'm here for a lot of the same reasons that Emily and Andy are.
Awesome. Thank you, Nigel.
I'll share as well. Hi, Jesse. Also, this seems like an URGE party. Also at URGE, but I'm in California, so I'm really excited to hear about what folks in the South are doing. Really just excited and feeling really fortunate to be in the space with you all and learning from you all. So similar to what URGE staff has already said. And I use she, her, AF pronouns. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do we want to move on to the outline? I think we've just about got everyone.
Yeah, I think we've spoken. All right, awesome. Thank you guys for all introducing yourself. And it was great to hear that we have a lot of people who are in some way connected to universities and PWIs in particular, or working with young people. So we're excited to have you all. Okay. So the outline, just kind of what we're going to be talking about today. The first thing is just we're going to do a brief introduction about reproductive justice. It sounds like a lot of people here have a background in this in some ways, so we will keep this part pretty brief, but just talking about what reproductive justice is and how people are organizing for it on campuses. And then we're going to be talking about the appropriation of reproductive justice, how it's co-opted to kind of fit the mainstream hegemony sometimes, like people who are pushing back against it while claiming that they're working for it. And then we're going to be talking about challenges for student organizers. So just the challenges that we faced personally, and we also want to hear about the challenges that you guys have faced. And then lastly, we're going to talk about potential solutions and success stories. So we're going to end it on a high note.
Yeah, so like Simran said, it sounds like a lot of you have kind of already an understanding of reproductive justice. So just briefly, reproductive justice, or RJ, is a framework and movement that was created by 12 Black women in 1994. And it states that all people have the human right to maintain personal bodily autonomy, the human right to have children, the human right to not have children, and the human right to parent children in safe and sustainable communities. And this definition is coined by Sister Song, which is the National Women of Color Reproductive Justice Collective, which was kind of born out of the theorizing that was created by the 12 Black women in 1994, and Sister Song was created in 1997. And so RJ was really created to center the experiences of people of color and women of color in the fight for reproductive freedom. There's a common misconception that it was created in response to reproductive rights being not including diverse stories, but it was really just created by centering those people, not really in response. And it just happens to kind of go beyond what the reproductive rights framework kind of advocates for. And yeah, so we can go on to our next one about intersectionality and how that relates to reproductive justice.
And so the next term that we kind of wanted to highlight for this was intersectionality, which was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw, co-founder of the African American Policy Forum. And she was also a lawyer and a professor, and she coined, so this is a quote from her: "Intersectionality is a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides, where it interlocks and intersects. It's not simply that there's a race problem here, a gender problem here, and a class or LGBTQ problem there." So this is a recent quote from her, I think 2009-ish, but don't quote me on that. But this is a idea that she came up with, I want to say in the 90s. And so it has been, but it's kind of been raised in popularity. At least I've been seeing it being told, this word being used not just by activists, but also by administration at universities, but also by mainstream media. This has kind of been a term that has been popularized and that I think a lot more people know about than some of the other terms that were created for activism.
Yeah, so this next slide, this is a headline that reads, "Elizabeth Warren is the first intersectional candidate for president." And so basically this is a co-optation of the term intersectionality, because as we know, a person can't be specifically intersectional, but we live like these lives that have different intersections within them. So we kind of wanted to open it up to you to talk about experiences that you've seen that have kind of had this co-optation of intersectionality or reproductive justice or other frameworks within Black feminism that are co-opted and used in this mainstream realm without really being rooted in the radicalism that they were created by or created for.
I can speak to this a little bit. I think, like, I don't want to get upset, but so there's like a lot of push for quote unquote diversity, equity, and inclusion. Like, I think specifically in academic settings, you know, on college campuses, at universities, and but also like in the private school that I talked about before. And I think also just in like consultancy companies, for example, who do DEI work. And so I feel like they talk about wanting to, you know, use an intersectional lens when they are discussing like race and all of these, I mean, basically, first of all, the problem is they just talk about race. And I don't even want to get too far into it, but I feel like that's definitely this sort of like capitalized, you know, structure that like very much is super basic. It doesn't even go towards like the depth that reproductive justice does in terms of like looking at all of the structures and systems of oppression. Like, so I feel like they like to use these terms that, you know, as you are saying, like intersectionality, like they want to use them, but they don't actually demonstrate them in like their practice and how they are trying to, you know, be diverse and, you know, have equity and be like inclusive, because they really aren't. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Gabby, for sharing that. I think that is definitely like right on, like hitting the nail on the head. Like a lot of times you see people using intersectionality, reproductive justice really more for the optics, or just to say that they did it, or to like not be quote unquote dragged or canceled or whatever, without actually doing the work that reproductive justice or intersectionality or any other term would actually entail for it to be like a lived reality. So I think that's really common. And then I'm also in a critical race theory course, and we're talking about diversity ideology and how it really centers white people and kind of absolves them of like their involvement in racism and the system of white supremacy by saying like, oh, well, we'll have this many Black people and this many queer people, and like, look, we've solved whatever homophobia or like anti-Blackness we could have caused, without actually like looking at the systems and the structures. So it's kind of like a way to like an easy way out, or to distance themselves from having any accountability for any harms that they've caused. So that's where it could get really like violent, because now you're not addressing actual issues that exist. So I really love that point. And then Kenjo also put in the chat, I've definitely seen white women / people call themselves intersectional feminists and sort of branding themselves as intersectional while definitely being racist. I definitely agree. Does anyone want to speak to that point?
I can. I also totally agree with this, just like the way that intersectional, almost in the same way that ally will kind of be used as like an identity thing, like people will just slap it on themselves and not be willing to do the work and do the actions for it. It's just a label that people feel like they need to connect on. And it's interesting, it's like, to me, these people who would never have put that word on until it became the thing to put onto the word feminist that they were already using before. Like it becomes just a branding technique. So it's unfortunate to see intersectionality and RJ become a branding of the mainstream, because I think at first when I first started seeing intersectionality in more of the mainstream world, I wanted to be excited about it. And I don't know if anyone else had this experience, but I like wanted to be excited about it. I wanted to feel like, oh my gosh, like people are talking about this and it's hitting a wider audience. And I think that that is partially true, but the big misstep is that these are created to fill gaps and to be subversive to a oppressive hegemony society. And so when they are then co-opted and taken in by them, by those societies themselves, then there's no way for them to do the work that they were created to do. And so it becomes this unfortunate, like, do we want to bring more people in and have more people using the word, even if they're using it poorly? I don't think that it actually, I think it has a poor impact on people like us and on queer people and on Black and brown people.
Yeah, definitely. And Kenjo's actually the director of a program I'm in for Advocates for Youth called Young Women of Color for RJ. And Kenjo, me and Jada, we talk about this all the time. Like, actually, I think the whole group, we might talk about this on calls all the time about just kind of just taking the terms but not actually embodying them. And so I'm wondering if anyone wants to speak to ways that it can be harmful when people kind of just take these terms without actually addressing what the terms would necessitate being addressed.
I feel like, yeah, going off of like what we were just talking about, it just kind of like, I feel like it especially, I feel like bothers me when white women and white people use, like, not to say that no white feminist could ever adopt a more intersectional approach. It's just, I feel like a lot of the time when people are marketing themselves that way, as you said, Lakia, it like becomes, it's also about like the optics of it and more so than the actual work. Because I think it's, you know, it's easy for someone to brand themselves as intersectional, but it's actually not easy to undo all of like the racist systems that are within so many different institutions and organizations. So it's like a way to like appear radical without actually having to do the work of like living out anti-racist values like all the time.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I'm thinking about that too with this headline that's up here, the Elizabeth Warren is first intersectional candidate for president, and how that sentence doesn't make any sense. And just like intersectionality intended to be a framework, but then taking it and putting it into this like electoral politics without actually be willing to do the work and to think about, like, this article is not thinking about how electoral politics are oppressive in so many ways, how they are not systems for big structural changes or not the only system for big structural changes. It's just like tacking that word on one candidate and allowing that to be like the quote unquote like woke thing to do. You know, it's no longer an analysis of the systems involved at all.
Yeah, 100%. And also, just thinking of how these things can be harmful for student organizers or student activists on campus. Like, if you have concerns about racism or any other issue that's going on, but then they can kind of use like, oh, well, we're an intersectional org, like we address these things, like that's not what we're doing. You might misunderstand, just kind of belittling your concerns because they feel like because they have this title of intersectionality or RJ that means that they're automatically doing the work by just using the terms. And Emily added, I've seen so many white feminists co-opt terms like intersectional, but they don't reflect how they contribute to white supremacy. Exactly. And then if you try to call them out, they further exhibit like white fragility and white supremacy and kind of like put that back on you for being like, how dare you critique me for something that's affecting you. So that's, for me, at least in my experience, that's kind of like the most upsetting parts, because it's like, I can experience racism, so how can you tell me as someone who's not experiencing like anti-Black racism that it's not valid, kind of. Thank you for sharing, Emily. Does anyone else want to speak to that? Or how, for people who are community organizers or like working for URGE, how have you seen like this kind of co-opting affect students that you work with, or how you show up if you are a white person that's supporting students of color at PWIs, how you kind of try to combat that to support the students of color who are organizing? Y'all are not a talkative group. Okay, Gabby. Gabby said teaching about race, class, and gender, but never referencing Black queer feminists, right? It does not make sense to me. And it personally is so hurtful as well, because I'm involved in this consulting company that is all about quote unquote diversity, equity, and inclusion. But their whole practice and system is totally unmoored to marginalize people's experiences, expertise, and organizing. And it feels overwhelming to try to tackle that. Right. And that kind of seems like that's the point. Like, sometimes I'm conspiracy theorist, but that seems like that's the point. Like, it's overwhelming to tackle. Like, not one person can really attack the issues because they're so like systemic and like entrenched within like whichever organization or whichever system you're working within. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest challenge that we're like kind of trying to highlight and have this conversation about, this talking about students of color organizing for reproductive justice at PWIs. It's like, it is overwhelming, and it's going to feel like it's really hard to tackle this giant institution that is working against you. And so like, that's why I think it's so important for us to be having these conversations and coming together and talking about what we can be doing. And also just like having a cathartic conversation about what sucks. Like, if I hope that you guys all feel comfortable like being able to share your experiences about just that things are hard, and we want to be a space for that.
And I also think, to Gabby's, the earlier point that she put in her message, talking about race, class, and gender, but never referencing Black queer feminists. I think that's something that we see often, where Black people and queer people and other marginalized people don't get to be experts in their own experiences sometimes, or you have to go through so many hoops and do so much work like Angela Davis to be seen as an expert. But then people who don't hold those identities can, you know, go to school and study some things, and they can become experts on your experiences and write about them. And so like, even if they like go to school and they get these credentials, and if you don't have those credentials, they're still seen as expert just because you don't have the like the PhD or the master's or whatever, which like just all goes back into like white supremacy culture. And then what does it look like to have people who don't have these lived experiences writing about our experiences? What gets lost in translation? What are things that you're not going to be able to understand if you don't live in that experience?
does anyone else have anything they want to share about personal experiences or ideas that they have about how intersectionality and RJ is co-opted and appropriated?
I think kind of to tack on to what y'all have been saying, also the issue when like white professors are using works written by, you know, Black folks and other marginalized folks is like, damn, department, just hire, you know, just stop hiring white people to teach these things.
Yeah, that's very true. Being in classes with white professors who are then the authority figure in the room and explaining to you your experience and theorizing about it with a bunch of other white students, like it is that, how can that not take a toll on somebody's mental health?
I took, this is an aside, but I took African American psychology in a predominantly white class with a white professor, and that definitely impacted like some things in my head. But like a lot of like nuances and like microaggressions that a white professor, and he was also a very young professor, so he didn't have that experience, wouldn't be able to catch on that like a more experienced professor or someone who was could relate to African American psychology directly would be able to point out and kind of, I think, call out and work out so that when the end of the semester comes to a head, we're not having the same issues and the same like comments that are like embedded in anti-Blackness, like low-key being stated that were stated in the beginning of the semester. Like there should be some progress. And I think sometimes when you have a white professor, they can't catch those small things. So then it just kind of builds up as, you know, time goes on.
Does anyone have like a professor horror story or the opposite, like a professor that was really wonderful for you during your time in college or that you know about, that you want to share?
Yeah, some people just put some in the chat actually. Kelsey,
oh, great.
Said, yeah, right on time. Kelsey said the most uncomfortable I was ever in a class was when we had a seminar called Structural Racism in America, and it was taught by a white professor, and every student, including me, was white, and I just had to drop it because you can't have a class like that without having people of color to speak to experiences. Yeah. Yeah, I'm always, this is a personal thing, but I'm always weary about like conversations about like, it could be race, it could be queerness, it could be anything. And then there's no people with those identities in the room. But then also that's what is that called when you get in like the little groups, like coalitions or whatever. I can't think of the name of it. There's specific things meant for that, but it's always like, who's going to be there to check them or to like call out anti-Blackness, call out homophobia, call out transphobia.
Right.
They're like all just agreeing with each other and just saying, oh yeah, that's right.
Right, like versus having an intentional space for white people to do like have collective conversation about whiteness without having the potential to do harm people of color, versus like a class that's intended to talk about racism and like should be open to everybody, but somehow has ended up with just like this white space of white professors and white students. Like I definitely agree that there's a fine line between a sounding board of people being just like agreeing with each other when they say toxic things versus like actually a potentially productive space.
Definitely. Oh, sorry. Emily
no, you're
said
good. Yeah, go ahead.
Emily said, at least at Mercer University, I've only read one book by a Black woman, and that was for my gender studies degree. My classes were majority white, and it felt like a lot of work to introduce reproductive justice in class.
To speak a little bit more on that, like we had like the books assigned to us, like even for feminist theory, which was one of our required courses for our degree, it was mainly like, I think it was all white. I remember reading Foucault and not understanding a single word that was being said. It was very tiresome to always have the perspective of cisgender white women. And like after learning more about reproductive justice, I tried to push more for folks to change their language to be more gender neutral and to, you know, include folks outside the gender binary, because our first class was introducing us to like gender. And so like the gender studies degree at Mercer is still very focused on women, cisgender women, and it's always going to be white women. And it feels so like kind of just like a token to have like my professor, the person that was in charge of the department at the time would always just be very proud to be, you know, like so woke, but like she was assigning us white authors and allowing for some problematic people say some problematic things and not really follow up of how it's harming the students of color, especially Black students in class.
Yeah, I'm in a feminist honors cohort at my school, and it's a 20-person cohort, one person transferred, so there's 19 of us, and it's majority white. But when professors, so we had an experience with this last year, but when something that's said that's like, it wasn't even just anti-Black, like it was like kind of like pro-white, I guess, and it's not addressed by the professors. So me and my friend, she's Latinx, and we were just texting about it in class, and we were just like, what is going on? Like, is the person not going to say anything? And then that kind of puts the responsibility on us to voice these concerns. And then after that was done, like we were kind of seen as like, oh, the problematic people, or like always have a problem and things like that. And then we get this negative connotation when, like, to us it feels like the professor's not doing their job by addressing these things, and that puts another burden on the students when these should be the professors, the professionals addressing these things, and that puts that on us. And so then that kind of like changes the dynamic within like the class or the cohort or whatever situation you're in. So that's like another burden.
I think that's a really, really good segue into our next slide, where we're going to like kind of dig more into the challenges that students of color who are organizing face, and one of them being the burden of having to like represent everybody and be the one checking somebody, even though the person who's should be checking somebody is the authority figure in the room who's not doing it. So we're going to go through kind of some of the challenges that we have experienced, but this is in no way a like comprehensive list. So we want to hear from you guys about your challenges, and just kind of like what experiences you guys have had. The first one is lack of representative leadership. This is something that I definitely saw at Tulane when we started with Students United for Reproductive Justice, and I was a freshman. And I, in high school, was really interested in abortion related stuff. So I was a clinic escort for a little bit in my time in high school. And so like that, reproductive rights was a really big part of my life, but I had no terminology for reproductive justice. I'd never heard of it before. I didn't have any of the language to describe my experiences or to like really understand the experiences of other people at that point. And so when I got to college and I got involved in Surge, and they were the ones who taught me about reproductive justice for the first time, and it was an executive board of entirely white women, white cisgender women. And so I sat in that room and I did like objectively learn a lot, because I learned the theory and I learned language and all of that, but I had my experiences theorized at me and explained to me by people who had never experienced what I had, and who were also explaining experiences that I had also never had, and were just like telling it to a room of other people as if it was something that was at arm's length. And so that was something that was really harmful to me, and that I think is an important challenge that people face, not just with student leaders, but also with professors like we were talking about, or administrators. Does anyone have anything that they want to like share on that, or we can go through all of them and then go? Kia?
Oh yeah, I could share. After Simran transitioned out of Surge, I was in Surge for a year without Simran in the organization. So there are no POC people outside of me. And I just felt a lot of like pushback from, well, I don't know, I would say white leadership at that time. And just like, there was a lot of tone policing. If I said things, it was like, or like if I gave an example, it's like, oh, well, why did you wait this long to give an example on how we can improve? Why didn't you say this 3 months ago? And I'm like, I didn't think about it 3 months ago. I don't know. I'm giving it now. Or just like, why did you choose to say it at this meeting and not that meeting? And I'm just like, girl, I don't know. Like, what is this? And so that was a very like heavy burden on me. Just like every way that I was communicating was for some reason an issue for this person. And then I just really leaned into the former president before that, who was also a white woman, but was like very sympathetic and I would say a very good ally, and kind of understanding where I was positioned. And then the advisor of the organization was also a white woman, but was also very understanding and so like not all white people are bad, you know, like there are people who understand and like can help and support students of color, because I felt a lot of support from like the white women in my circle that kind of helped me like understand that I'm not going like wild in my head. Like it's not me, like this person's projecting a lot onto me. And just like, so it was nice having, even though I didn't have representative leadership within the direct organization, I did have it, I did have people to support, even though they didn't look like me outside that were connected to the organization, but not directly within it.
Does anyone else have anything they want to share about that like specific bullet? Maybe like how has a lack of representative leadership, how have you seen that in your time in universities or otherwise, and like how has that impacted you?
Yeah, I could definitely say that the doing the labor for the administration bullet point like really resonates with, you know, me, like thinking back to experiences I had as a student activist, and then also experiences supporting other students. A lot of people who, you know, a lot of different university activists, I feel like, do things that it's like ultimately the school should be paid for doing, whether that's people who are, you know, advocating and providing resources for survivors on campus, people providing things like free contraceptives, resources for LGBTQ students. A lot of the time, you know, students come together to meet the gaps that they're seeing among like the student community, but it's like really like university administrators oftentimes get paid a lot of money. So it's like, why aren't they meeting the needs of students? And it shouldn't really be on the students themselves. So that's one point that I think I've seen happen a lot.
Yes, I talked about this on the last episode of my podcast, Exploitation of Student Labor. I definitely feel that. And I feel like a lot of the issues that we address as student organizers, faculty could also like sit in a room and talk to students and like figure out these issues as well, and then solve them on their like salary time that they get paid for, and not exploiting students, like trying to juggle that with work and other things. So I just want to speak my piece on that, but I 100% agree with what you said, Kenjo.
Yeah, me too. I think that's a really like good point and painful point. Like when I was in college, I ran a 24/7 hotline for survivors of sexual violence, and it was fulfilling, but I didn't get paid. Like, and we just like would run it all the time. It was completely student run. We planned out the schedule. We did workshops on campus, and it was all unpaid. And like that just looking back on it, even though I think it was a valuable resource, how is it possible that students who weren't just unpaid, but who did like a 40-hour training, like we're not therapists, we were not qualified to be providing the amount of support that we ended up providing. Like these are things that professionals and the people who are being paid should be more involved in at the very least. So I totally agree. I also remember one time that I was speaking on a panel, and somebody asked a question. It was a panel of like me, one other student, and then like a couple administrators, and somebody asked a question about how the administration was handling white supremacy on campus, and I was the only person of color on the panel, and everyone looked at me, even though I'm not an administrator, and I was like, why am I answering this question? And I just like had to give the world's most bullshit answer because I didn't know. Like that was just like not something that I could speak to, and it was just so frustrating that none of the administrators on the panel, either like none of them felt qualified to speak on it because they didn't have an appropriate answer at all, and that all of them felt like it was okay to stare at the only person of color on it who's a student and a child. So I totally agree. It can be very frustrating.
Yeah, Kenjo added in the chat, she said, sounds like you were doing the work a person working on Title IX or violence prevention on campus should have been doing, and those are full-time salary jobs.
Right.
Yeah. No, I just got a text. I run the emergency contraception program at my school, and one of the volunteers texted me while we were presenting and was like, oh, this person asked for 2 Plan Bs, but they got some like earlier this week, like do they like just like asking me like to counsel the person or like support them? I'm like, I'm not a counselor, I'm not a supporter. Like all I can really do is give them the Plan B they need or they think they need. So I definitely resonate with what Simran is saying, is like we're expected to do things that we're not qualified to do. And that's also another burden, because like what if you give them the wrong advice or you do something wrong because you don't have those qualifications, and now like it's on you because you made a misstep, but then there's no administrator supporting you and like giving you the training or paying you to get training or anything. So yeah.
I'm going to run through the other 2 bullet points, and then we can open it up to have a larger conversation about it. So the other 2 ideas or points that I had to make were that the taking of undue credit for ideas/initiatives. So this is both by other students, but also by administrators, in that like we as students of color have, because the burden is put on us to come up with the ideas to provide the support, but then the administration can turn around and be like, look at all these great resources we have, look at all these awesome things that we've been doing, but the we is really students of color who have been organizing all of this and who have been doing it for free. And then also with other students, particularly white students, taking advantage of that labor, and then being able to kind of co-opt it and take credit for it. That was something that I experienced a lot when I was doing my sexual violence work at Tulane. There was particularly just a few white students who were involved in student government, which is, I think it was like the bureaucratic process at Tulane. And so they were like higher up in the student government process. And so when all of the work that we did would end up getting pushed over to them, like they would be the ones who got the credit for it, and they were the ones who were praised for it. And I spent a lot of time thinking, oh, it's about the movement. It's not about me. I don't need the credit. Like it's as long as people are getting help, I don't care. And I think back to that, and I think that I'm not the only person who thought like that, and that's partially true, but also we deserve the credit for the work that we're doing, and we deserve to, because credit turns into lots of other things. It turns into money, it turns into jobs, it turns into all these other things that allow white people and white students to make it up in these fields while we continuously have to struggle to get the recognition that we deserve. And then the last one is the leaving behind the most marginalized students, the most marginalized people. So in this case, this was what ended up pushing me out of Students United for Reproductive Justice. It was International Women's Day, and the president had decided that she wanted to give out tampons and pads. And I thought that was not awesome. Just I thought we could do this. Yeah, I thought we could just do it tomorrow. Like just do it on a different day. It's a great thing to do, but why do we have to do it on International Women's Day when we could be celebrating all women's despite what their bodies might look like or whether or not they menstruate? And the amount of shit that I got for it pushed me out. And so just looking at how trans students and non-binary students were pushed out of the narrative on that day was very frustrating. And I think that it's easy for people who want to do this work, like people who are doing this work, and especially white people and more privileged people, to just forget about the most marginalized groups because it's harder. So if anyone has any other experiences to share, we'd love to hear them. Or any other ideas of challenges that we didn't hit in the bullets.
I can share. So I think for like leaving behind the most marginalized, specifically with like the alumni group that I'm working with at my former private school, there's so many ways where people of color are disrespected and like gaslighted about kind of the racism and like oppression that they experience from the administration specifically. And I think one of the ways though that we are leaving behind the most marginalized in our efforts right now is while we've been looking at students, we haven't been looking at like the maintenance staff who work at our school. So for example, there are like staff there who have worked for 20 plus years, and they hardly get paid, and these staff are like Black primarily. and like the other white people on staff like get away with not doing work during the day and like not sharing their responsibilities and not being asked to do things and not being expected to do things, where like the burden of making up for like the work that they don't do falls on the Black staff. And I think like that's sort of one of the ways where we as like alumni haven't been attuned to that, and really like emphasizing that this is something that happens because like they like because I'm close with those people as well, so like they suffer a lot of verbal abuse too from like the supervisor that they have on like the maintenance crew. And of course, like the supervisor and administrators are all white. So I feel like that's might be like a different spin in terms of like leaving behind the most marginalized. But I think that's one way. And also just like everywhere, like again, yeah, as you were saying, not thinking about trans and non-binary and queer people and students and like their very existence. I've definitely experienced that a lot. So yeah, and I think just like the gaslighting too is definitely like at my private school, that might be like something that we could talk about more, but that's been a lot of what has been happening like during this year. So yeah, of just like, no, like we actually really care about people of color, you know, like, I don't know how this could have happened for so long. Like, why didn't you talk about this before? Because, you know, surely like it couldn't have been like that, you know, that kind of sentiment.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Gabby. I totally agree and think that like your point about the maintenance staff also is like they're so often forgotten in these conversations about students, about universities, and the amount of abuse that I have seen of maintenance staff and of dining hall staff and stuff like that while we were students, and yet they still are not part of a lot of students' organizing efforts, I think is a really good point, that they are in a lot of ways a very marginalized group on campus that don't even make it to the forefront of our minds as students. And like I remember dining hall and people would just say people would act like Draco Malfoy. They'd be like, oh, my father will hear about this. Like whenever like the dining hall staff like didn't put tomatoes on there, whatever. They were just like, students were mean. Like students were so mean. And so thinking about how like we as students want to show solidarity for our fellow students, but not when they are choosing to like be abusive and harmful to other marginalized people on campus.
Yeah, I was gonna say something and then I was gonna speak to I think it was Gabby who was speaking, her point on the gaslighting. I think that one's like a very common one. I remember with Surge, I would be like told like I was too critical. Like if someone wanted to do this idea, I'd be like, oh, like maybe we shouldn't center white people on Black History Month, like during Black History Month, like maybe we could like do that, you know, in March or something. And then everyone else would be okay with it except for the president. But then, so that was an issue. But then they would call me and ask me like, hey, like, is there anything problematic about this person before I post them? And I'm like, well, in one instance, you want me to tell you when something's like problematic or like we shouldn't do it. But then on the other hand, you do. So it was just like, I didn't know how to navigate that. And to me, that was like a form of gaslighting. Like, I felt like I could never like do anything right. So that's definitely like been an experience of mine. And then Nigel put in the chat, I think about a tweet I saw that said, quote, radical ideas die by committee. I've experienced this as a student when I was a part of a group of students that protested slash sat in student government. Our very concise radical list of demands were taken to a committee run by one of the administrators that caused the most harm. And those demands were watered down into a webpage and a dance party. That is very true. I was on a call with some period equity people and they said the exact same thing, that like administration will try to appease us by saying like, oh, we'll create this committee or this task force and we're going to solve all the problems, and we might even give out like a budget that we can plan things with, and it's really just like a programming budget with like how you said a dance party, and then all the radical things that you wanted just kind of get thrown by the wayside.
Yeah, and I really appreciate what you're saying about how like it's not just the administrators committees, it's also just like student government committees. Students become pawns of the administrators in this way. Like they create these committees where they just want to water everything down into the idea of something versus the actual change that the people were asking for in the first place. I was very briefly a senator on student government, and it was the worst part of my college career. But for a while, there were some activists at Tulane who were creating this movement, legislation, I guess was the word, about a sexual violence reform policy, of sexual violence activism. And it was about structural changes. And when it came out, the legislation then read that student government supports the intent of the legislation. Instead of just supporting it, they had to say that they supported the intent of it, and watered it down so much just because they like a refusal to support any strong language, any strong movement is just part of the committee process. So I think that's absolutely true. That's frustrating to realize that the structures that were built that you think that you can use to support you end up just killing movements.
Do we want to move on to solutions?
Yeah, if we're ready to get to the slightly more lighthearted part of it.
So for our solutions, we have you could take a leadership role, find alternative involvement opportunities. I know for me, I did take a leadership role and then tried to kind of like transition into also finding alternative involvement opportunities as a way to kind of deal with some of the issues that I was facing as like a Black student organizer on campus at a predominantly white institution. I know Simran also has some experiences as well.
Yeah, I left Surge because of it, like I mentioned before, and so I kind of went in the finding alternative involvement opportunities path and looking into getting more involved in sexual violence response and kind of getting out of that space that was toxic to me. But I think that one thing that's important to note is that, like, yes, this slide is titled solutions, but these options didn't literally solve anything, in that it was important and good for my mental health to leave Surge. And I didn't want to be in that space anymore. I didn't want to work with those people anymore. But was it actually a solution for reproductive justice? Not exactly. And finding alternative involvement was also really great, but those groups also had problems. Like the sexual violence response team had lots of problems around race, around queerness, and those were still, as I took a leadership role there, those were still issues that I had to deal with. And so I think that's less about finding solutions and more about mitigating how we can take care of ourselves, how we can find ways to do our work as effectively and as honestly as possible.
Yeah, and I think definitely the things that I did were also just to kind of protect my mental health. When I took the leadership role as president for Surge, well, actually, I was going to quit. I told the advisor I wasn't going to do Surge another year, and then like last minute ended up being president. And so, I mean, I guess that helped in the sense that I didn't have like a president looking down on me saying all these things. But one thing that I tried to do moving forward was Surge. We made a recommendation alongside the faculty of the Newcomb Institute, which is like our gender equity department where our organization is housed, that recommended that any like president of the organization should be a person of color. And so now we have a Black president. So these are like I was Black president, now we have another Black president, and hopefully we'll have another like person of color moving forward. So that's one step, but that's also, it's not like in the Constitution. There's also some, like we had a lawsuit, and there's really weird things that we can actually add to to our constitutions at our school now. But so like, yeah, it's not like in the Constitution, it's not like definitely systemic, but it's like one aspect of like kind of changing the culture of an organization so that people that come up behind me and Simran don't face or hopefully won't face the exact same issues that we faced. And then also with I mentioned briefly the Plan B program I started at my school. Instead of just like going to a committee and saying, like, oh, we need more emergency contraception, we kind of just created our own thing separate from the school and just did it, and then had some friends write articles in our school newspaper, and then it was out before the school could stop it, and it was getting all this great, oh yeah, that's the next thing. So we started free emergency contraceptions. And so it was like, and then Shamat wrote an article in our school newspaper, and so it was out before administration could stop it. So they really had no option but to support it because it had such great feedback. And then now they provide their emergency contraception for free as well in the health center, and they provide it to our neighboring university, which is Jesuit, that doesn't provide EC at all. So we kind of like push them into doing what we wanted them to do, instead of kind of going through the like, oh, let's sit down and meet with the administration, then you got to wait 2 meets for a meeting, and then they say, oh, you got to meet with this person, you got to create a committee, just like skipping all that and saying we're going to do what we want to do, and then yeah, just kind of doing it. So that's something that's worked for us. We also have, well, before we get into the other success stories, do we have any other solutions that people want to suggest on how to kind of combat some of the issues that students of color can face when organizing?
In terms of what you were talking about earlier, and like task force being like the places that radical ideas go to die, I definitely agree with that. I would say like generally one thing I've seen work is like if let's say like you're, you know, a group of activists making demands of the school, and the school like suggests that you join like a task force or committee or whatever, like you can join the task force, but generally I would say you should continue like escalating from there, because like sometimes people may like pause their organizing or like see it as a win that the school has like offered them a meeting essentially, but it's like oftentimes they can use that as sort of like a way to like distract you. So you should like essentially keep planning what you were planning to do and like keep applying the pressure, even if they give you like the small concession of like having meetings with them. And there's this really good resource, this other like group that works with student activists created that I'm posting in the chat as well. That's like a guide to like how like admin will try and like kill your campaign using like task force and stuff. So that's one thing, like continuing to escalate that I've seen work.
Yeah, I think that's awesome. And I totally agree that I think they like do it on purpose. They're trying to throw you a bone so that you stop doing what you're doing that they don't like. And it's easy to like accept that. I remember I got offered to be on some like sexual violence combat team or whatever with a bunch of administrators. And I think that something that they do is make it feel like an honor. At least that's what they did in this case. It was exciting that they chose me to be on this team. And so it makes it feel like you want to give it your all. And then all of a sudden you're spending 10 hours a week planning how everyone can wear teal to a baseball game. And that's what your organizing looks like, because that's what they want to focus on. And so I think that's very real. It's easy to get sucked into that and then realize that you kind of moved away from the movement.
Yeah, they definitely, in my experience doing like some like Black feminist organizing, like not necessarily related to reproductive justice, it was like a group of like 12 of us, 12 Black women. They definitely kind of seduced us with the concept of like, oh, we have meetings with Fitz, who's like the president of the university. And it's like, we have these regular meetings. So we're like hot shit and we're so cool, you know? And that definitely for a while slowed us down, mainly because we were so much focused on being super productive and having our stuff all together when we met with him, so that he saw us as like in a positive light, like, oh, these girls are like about what they're talking about, they're like, you know, they're on it. So we spent so much time just preparing to meet with him that we weren't even focusing on like our real demands, and so that really slowed us down for a while. And like now I think we're starting to pick back up, like, you know, screw him, we've seen him kick his feet for like a couple months, and so like just getting back into like what we were like originally organizing for, and not letting like basically what Kenjo and Simon were saying, just let like the idea of like having these meetings or being on these task force or getting to meet with the president regularly. And then he would take us to like, it's called the 49 Club or whatever, which is like this bougie like area where like faculty go to eat outside of the cafeteria. And it's like they come in with like the little, like when you go to a hotel and they like take the lid off and it's like this silver lid and it's like this fancy food and people wait on you. He makes us meet there. So it's like we get this free meal, and a lot of us are like older students who don't have meal plans. So like just like seducing us with all these things, so where we get distracted from like our actual goals. Simran said he took you there too. He couldn't pronounce my name. Oh my goodness, yeah.
We had lunch like 3 times.
Our names.
He had no idea he took me to lunch at that club 3 times, and I was like, oh yeah, like I was so excited to eat. And then like I don't think he knew my name before I got there. Like I don't think he couldn't pronounce it when I got there. And it really made me laugh, where I was like, it wasn't like he saw our activism and was impressed, you know? It's like somebody else was like, you gotta take this kids to dinner or to lunch so that they shut up, you know? Like somebody else told him to do that. That's why he didn't know our names in advance. And so it's very very telling, backfires a little bit.
Definitely. His assistant person is a Black man, and he's the one who knows like all our names and schedules things. So it's very interesting how that labor is put on a Black man, and like this white man is like completely out of touch. But does anyone have any other ideas for solutions before we go on to our other success story? Or maybe ways that for our community organizers or community partners, ways that you could support your students when they are like doing organizing on their campus, ways that you can provide support while they're like working with other people as like admin on campus, administration on campus.
It's okay if not. We can move on. We can talk about success stories. Yeah, so we can also come back to that. If you have any ideas that come to you, you're welcome to unmute and chat about it. So the first success story we were talking about was what Kia was talking about with her emergency contraceptive situation. Do you have anything else you want to say on it?
No, I think I touched all of the things on that.
Cool.
And then this next one, this is another success story. There were a group of student activists in Louisiana doing a lot of organizing and trying to mobilize young people and voters in general to vote no on a Louisiana amendment that would have made Louisiana trigger law a trigger state essentially. So if Roe v. Wade was ever overturned, abortions would immediately become illegal in Louisiana. There'd be all the clinics would shut down. And so that was on the ballot for November 3rd. And so they did a lot of organizing digitally and, because of COVID online. And the amendment still passed, unfortunately. So now Louisiana is a trigger state, but I still put this in here as a success story because even though we didn't get I wasn't a part of the group of people, but even though Louisiana didn't get the win we wanted, which would be the amendment not passing, that would have been a win for us. I think this is still a success story because there were so many students who had never done any ORJ organizing before who moved into this movement because of this, people who had to learn what RJ was before they started organizing. So now there's more young people who know about RJ, there's more people who know how to organize their communities, there's more people who know how to talk about the thing that they were talking, I wasn't in the group, but who know how to talk about the things that they were talking about and can inform other people even when they're not in a formal like organizing fellowship. They can just like do these with their intimate relationships. So I think that this is still definitely a win because we're moving more people into the movement and like giving people more of the skills to do the advocacy because advocacy, like when it's planned, is really good, but then the one-on-one conversations we have with each other are also very impactful. So we've got like tons of young people in Louisiana who can now do that. So I think this is still a very good win. So this also is kind of like a reminder that our like just to kind of like find wins and even the small things when we take our L's, because I think that's kind of the nature of the RJ movement, is that like so many of these things have been created like before, like these systems were created before us, these systems were designed for our failure. And so any small wins that we get are like really monumentous because so many things stacked against us: racism, white supremacy, anti-Blackness, homophobia, transphobia. There's like so many layers. So the small wins really matter as well to me. So I wanted to include this one. But does anyone else have any examples of like wins that they've seen, like maybe urged, like wins you've seen of your organizers or some students who have had specific wins or alumni who've had wins when they were in school? Maybe one person could share.
I don't know that this was actually very helpful or supportive, but at least when some of my campus chapters are facing issues with admin, I guess a really specific example is Alabama had a trigger ban a few years ago as well. and our campus chapters were tabling really intensively, you know, in student centers and housing and some other locations. And towards the end of that campaign before the election, housing suddenly had all these complaints about, you know, our student organizers, and they were like, well, you can't do this anymore, you can't do it in this way, which they found really frustrating. But I just kept trying to frame it for them as like, yeah, it's really frustrating, but this just shows like how much power y'all actually have. You're literally scaring housing into changing policies.
Yeah, definitely. Sorry, I didn't know if someone was going to say something. Sorry about that. But yeah, like, and I think that's really great, Andy, how you were able to remind them and kind of instill that confidence in them, like, hey, like, don't even worry about it, like, you're doing the thing. So I think that's really good. I think it's something that we need as student activists, but also just young people in general, is kind of like people who've been in the movement longer, to just kind of like tap us on the shoulder and be like, hey, it's okay. Like, I know when this came out for Vote No, like, I'm not much older than a lot of people, but I called some people I knew and I was like, oh my God, you guys did so amazing. Like, you know, just like giving them like positive like feedback or whatever, to just like let them know like it doesn't even matter, like you're doing good. Because even if you lose, you know, like just keeping them in the movement and keeping them going really matters. So I think that's a really great practice. And Kenjo also put in the chat, many activists in our youth activist network have gotten their schools to provide free condoms and menstrual products and other repro-related resources for students. And I really like this one because they've gotten their schools to provide it and not them like providing it directly. So like that's taking the burden off of the students, and that's also like making the schools accountable to the students. And then also like it's taking it out of their budget, not the students' budgets, or like the students fundraising or the students going to a community organization. So that's a really good like activist aspect.
Awesome. Well, we have just 3 minutes till 5, so the last page we have is just the contact us page. I put my phone number, email, social media. Yeah, if you guys are interested, you're welcome to reach out in any way. I am generally very responsive, and I like to connect with people and continue this conversation. Also, like I mentioned, I'm a writer, so if anyone is an artist or has any like art topics that they want to talk about, I really enjoy having those conversations. So feel free to reach out.
Yes, and you can also reach out to me. Quick little plug, I host a podcast called Black Feminist Rants that centers conversations on reproductive justice and student activism, which is what we're talking about right now. So definitely follow on Instagram at Black Feminist Rants and Twitter at Black Fem Rants, and listen anywhere you listen to your podcast. But yeah, and I interview a lot of like youth activists. So like if you want to hear directly what young people are saying, there's a lot of young people on there, and old people like Loretta Ross and Monica Simpson. But yeah, you could definitely just email either of us if you just want to talk about this workshop or anything else. But thank y'all for attending and for participating.
Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it. It's a great conversation. Okay. Thank you, Gabby.
You're welcome.